How do we make scroll saw art look hyper realistic? Lots of detail. So I'm gonna try to tackle my most detailed scroll saw project to date. We'll see if I can pull it off. I was reading Daredevil and I came across this stunning artwork by Carmen Carnero. Wow, mind-blowing. How do I turn that into wood? With the added flair of saying, no paints, no stains, no dyes, it needs to be natural wood colors. This is a challenge. But look at that artwork. You gotta do it, right? I mean, look at it. Like with all my scroll saw projects, my first step is to make a template, because I need to know where one board's gonna end and the other workpiece is gonna begin. I threw the picture into Inkscape, converted it over to a vector image. The various color tones and shading made it really difficult to nail down, and I had to do a lot of cleanup work. When making a template, I always have to remind myself that each one of the lines that's in that needs to be big enough for me to be able to cut out. If it's too thin for a scroll saw blade to fit into, then it needs to either be removed or I need to modify it in some way. This picture was so difficult that ultimately I ended up just having to redraw the artwork myself. In doing so, I also had to decide what aspects did I really want to keep with this one, such as the shaded areas or certain strands of hair. So the process took me a really long time to work out. Admittedly, I probably put way too much detail on this that I likely won't use. I finally got my template. I'm excited to jump into the project, but I can't start it just yet. I need to have a solid foundation. You can't build a house on sand, right? So I need some MDF, and I need a couple pieces of veneer. I'm thinking cherry veneer for the back of the project, Wingate veneer for the front of the project. This is gonna give me a flat surface for me to glue all my work pieces onto. I don't have to worry about it bowing and twisting and cupping and all that nasty stuff that a solid wood panel can do. I'm using Unibond 1 glue for this. I really like it. It has a long open time, so I'm not rushing. I'm working with urgency. Not rushing. Cherry veneer first. Wingate veneer. I think my panel looks great, dead flat, beautiful cherry on one side, Wingate on the other side. And I went ahead and printed off my picture, and that's crazy and intimidating. I'll admit, that looks intimidating. Lots of hair, lots of negative space, lots of dark. I need to make a background for this thing, and what I am picturing is maybe also a dark background. Reason being is because then any of the colors in this picture, like her dress, will really just pop. So, dark background. I need to find something to make a background out of. I think I got something. That looks cool. All right, I think I got something. I am very spoiled that I have so many cool pieces of wood. I admit that. Check out this walnut. Ooh, wow, that's insane. Check out her hair, right? All this with this, yeah, winning combo. I trimmed my workpiece down and you can see how this grain just looks really cool, but check this out. If I flip it around this way, I can see that this grain kind of looks like wind. If I put the picture like this, it would look like that's what's making her hair flow. So I'm gonna attach our template this way. To do that, I'm gonna use some contact paper and spray adhesive. I'm gonna put contact paper down on my workpiece, spray some glue on the back of my template, stick it onto my board, and then I know that whenever I'm completely done, I can pull that contact paper off and I'm not gonna have as much of that sticky residue on the work surface. Ironically, after spending all that time making that background, we're not really gonna use a whole lot of it, right? Just kind of the areas right around her hair. And some of those areas I'm not really gonna cut out now anyway. As far as the blade goes, we're dealing with a super thin panel here. I mean, it's probably like 1/8 of an inch, maybe even a little bit thinner than that. So I am using a small blade. This is a number 2 blade, crown tooth blade. It's gonna give me ultra fine cuts, and that's gonna help out because there's a lot of areas where those hair strands are that it's gonna be miserable to try to sand in there to smooth it out. And a crown tooth blade will give you glossy, clean cuts, and I won't even really have to sand it. Background's cut out. You can see that I had to remove most of it, I'm gonna glue that onto my, my Wingate panel here, and I also have this piece of really thin poplar that's gonna get glued onto the backside, because if you glue something on one side, you have to glue it on the other side. Otherwise, this whole thing will go, we don't want that. I got my roller here. I'm gonna use some regular Type Bond glue, and I'm gonna put it on very thin. Don't want any squeeze out with this. I'm gonna coat the whole background, stick it on there, put it in my vacuum bag, and I'm gonna squish it down. I put together a frame, it fits nicely, and I kept Elektra. We're gonna need this because it's gonna allow me to put all the pieces back where they're supposed to go at. Now, where do you start with something this complicated? I'm thinking the dress, because it looks the most complicated. I don't know, I might change my mind a little bit later on. As far as the dress goes, there's lots of different reds. I kind of want to go with maybe different species, because then it kind of gives that illusion of layers, right? I like to try to take a lot of my colors and lump them together and put them in bags like this. Easier to use smaller pieces for something like this, and keeps all my stuff organized. So I'm looking through all these different species. I've got some bloodwood, I've got some babinga, I've got some just red heart, other red things, I don't know. I'm gonna look through them, see which ones I want for this, and just start going one piece at a time. Like the Johnny Cash song. One piece of... Take a look at this. Ooh, that is red heart. That looks pretty awesome, huh? This is a piece of turning stock. If you really want good stuff, look for turning stock or actually veneer. That's where the good pieces of wood go. That will look amazing for the folds of the dress. So I'm gonna take this, slice off a piece of this, probably maybe like a 1/4 inch thick, somewhere around there. Start making my dress out of that. There's a lot going on with this dress. So what I'm thinking is maybe I could cut out different pieces out of the red heart or the bloodwood, and then I could stick those together, like intertwine them, and that will give it the illusion of shadow as that dress flows around. I can stack these boards together and cut them out, or I can cut them out separately. I'm not really worried about having a perfect fit here because there's so much going on. So I'm just gonna cut them out separately, and then I can glue the pieces together with some CA glue. You see how I'm doing this? I'm cutting out one piece or section at a time within my background. So I can cut out a piece of her dress and then put that back on my picture there, and then I can cut out that same piece out of the actual work piece that I need. So out of, red heart. Glue it into place, and then remove the background, and then cut out another piece, and then do the same thing. The good thing about this process is it makes it so that all my pieces end up where they're supposed to be at, because otherwise, there's no telling where I would glue something to. One challenge is trying to figure out exactly what blade I want to use. Well, actually, I know what blade I want to use. I want to use the tiniest blade with the finest teeth. That's why almost always I grab that 0 or number 2 crown tooth blade. However, that's not really working out too well with this, because the red heart pieces are thicker and they're also oilier, much oilier. And then, it just makes it really hard to cut with such a fine blade. But I do need that fine blade, or as close as possible, because I have so much detail. Then I go and start trying to cut out, all the walnut pieces. These are really thin, they cut like butter. So what I find myself doing is putting the number 2 blade in, cutting out the walnut, and then seeing if I could do it out of the red heart. If it doesn't work, maybe a number 3, maybe a number 5, I don't know. So I'm switching blades constantly, which just adds the time on this project, because it hasn't taken long enough already. I pretty much have the lower part of the dress done. It's all flowing around her. And whenever I go to install these pieces, I like to sand them first before I glue them in there. So I'll take like sanding sticks and I'll just round over some of the edges, get them in place. And now I can look at it and go, all right, does it need any more profiling. And this one definitely does. I'm gonna take some regular sandpaper and do some hand sanding and stuff, but I'm probably gonna also use this guy. As I was finishing up some of the dress, I realized I'm not quite done with the background yet. There's still some areas I didn't cut out and install, like around her hair, the cap, around the ribbon at the top. I gotta cut all those pieces out and then glue those in. I'm just not liking what I'm seeing here. I did like the combination of the red heart and the bloodwood in the lower part of the dress, but as I moved my way up higher, it's just not doing it for me. And while it pains me to say this, I think the only solution is just to grab a chisel and rip that section out, start all over. It really sucks because that's a lot of time and effort, but I like to think that it's gonna be well worth it in the end if I do it, better. I'm gonna hope it's gonna turn out better. Let's hope it's gonna turn out better. I don't wanna do this a third time. I think maybe the lesson learned here is sometimes you gotta go simple to really have a bigger effect. But ironically, as I was cutting that out, I was thinking, by going simple, maybe we should actually go fancy. You see that little detail right there? That little piece of highlight is small, but it has a big impact on the image. So I think I'm gonna try to replicate that using some holly. What I can do is cut out most of my workpiece, then stick it onto some holly using some painter's tape and super glue. By stacking my two pieces and then cutting them out, I know that whenever I do reassemble this thing, those two pieces are gonna fit together perfectly, and that's gonna give me my little bit of highlight. I'm trying to do justice with the shape of her body and the flow of the dress and her pose. So I'm trying to use the wood grain to my advantage so I can position my pieces in a certain way so that grain provides the realness. So it looks kind of like the fabric or how the fabric is flowing. Now, one thing that does help me is I put my template on my workpiece and I'll trace it out and then lift it up and I can see, hey, is that exactly where I wanted that, or should I put it in a different part of the board? I went through a bunch of boards to figure out what do I want to do for skin tones. And I found a piece of maple here that has really subtle grain. That might work out well because, I don't want to have streaks going across her chest, her arms, her face from the wood grain. So let's try this, see how it goes. I know I'm using light wood, but that doesn't mean I'm gonna shy away from the highlights. I do have some holly here that I'm gonna add that subtle detail all around her, arm area. Elektra has red wraps around her arms. Well, check out this piece that I made because, look at this. That highlight fits perfectly in there. Oh. I know I don't typically show it, but I do actually clamp my pieces down whenever I glue them. Oftentimes though, because of the shape of them or the position and stuff, I'll have to use like a piece of aluminum, or I have a brass piece here too. That way I can position it exactly where I need to, and it gives me even clamping pressure across that entire piece. I just finished the upper arm, so instead of working on the face, now I'm gonna go down and do the second arm, because I already have maple and red heart that's the right thickness for that. So I'm gonna knock out that arm, then I'll come back and do the whole head area. I cut out Elektra's face earlier, but in hindsight, I think it's too thin. It doesn't provide enough depth between her chest and her neck to the face. So that means I'm gonna take a thicker piece and I'm gonna cut that out. Then I'll move on to the cap and then all those ribbons that are in the back that kind of just flow into the background. I can't put off any longer. It's time to do the hair, and it's a beast. She's got hair all over the place. There's a lot of negative space where I'm not gonna have any pieces, and that's where the wingate in the background's really gonna make up for that and be, serve as the hair itself. But the hair that is visible, all those strands, they need to be actually visible. And I can't use black for that because it's just gonna get lost in the background. So that's why I'm gonna use blue maho. Blue maho is a wood species that grows in Jamaica and is naturally blue, which is kind of trippy. Now here's the thing, for decades, comic artists have been using blue for black highlights, especially in hair. Because if you use white or gray on top of black, it can make the character look, older than what they really are. So I'm gonna use the same technique. I'm not gonna reinvent the wheel here. And one thing that I'm not sure on is how thick do I want my pieces. So I might have to play around with the sizes a bit. Here's an opportunity for those super fine details that give it a realistic look. The hair. So those hair strands, I drew lots of black lines in there. So I've got a micro drill bit. This thing's tiny, tiny, tiny. I'm gonna drill a pilot hole, or really like a million pilot holes in each one of those little black lines, and then cut them out. It's gonna take me forever to do this, but it's gonna provide so much more detail to this that I think it's gonna be worth it. I couldn't decide exactly how thick I wanted some of the hair strands in some of the places, so I just went ahead and made them extra thick. I figure, not a big deal. I'm gonna sand them and profile them down a little bit later on. One area that I'm not happy with is the background. I made those pieces pretty thin, just barely higher than the actual walnut background itself, but it needs a little bit more depth. So what I'm gonna do is, I have a piece of blue mayo here that's much, much lighter. So it's got some really light blue, and then it kind of goes into streaks of green. So I'm gonna cut this thin, and I'm gonna cut really, really thin hair strands. I'm gonna glue it on top of the hair that I already have in place. And that should give it a little bit more dimension. Notice the tiny details in her face. So her eyes are kind of slanted down, right? She's looking down at the enemy. And her lips have just a subtle bit of brown to them. So I went ahead and cut the lips out of a piece of rosewood that I had. So it's just enough of the right color. Now, when it comes to the eye, look at this tiny little piece here. So this is a piece of holly that I have glued. Right onto the end of that is a piece of blue mayho. It's ultra tiny, but that's all I really need for her eye. Okay, it looks like I have just about everything in place except for her sigh. So now's gonna be the time where I just put on some headphones and jam out and do some profiling, do the shaping, because this is really where you wanna do all the work to make it look realistic. So what I've got is my rotary tool here with some different sand discs. This is gonna be a lot of it. I've got some of these are sanding sticks. These are awesome for getting in those tiny areas. Big fan of these. And then I got some chisels for scraping. And you know, unsung hero, where are you at? Mini files. I'm gonna use these often. I prefer to start in the thinnest areas first because, well, I don't wanna sand those too much. And that's gonna give me sort of a reference to know how thick do I want my other pieces from there. I also try to make it a habit to sand the lighter areas last. And that's because those dark pieces like the red, the black, the blue mayho, all of those are gonna create a lot of sawdust, and that's gonna stain the maple and the holly. So I'm gonna have to sand those last just to make sure that they're all cleaned up properly. I try to find opportunities wherever I can to provide it a little bit more realism. So like, look at her hand. We know that the pointer finger is a little bit further back than some of the other fingers, or the tips of her fingers are kind of curled under so her knuckles are facing upwards. So I can take a sanding stick and start sanding a little bit here and there and just profiling that a bit, and it's gonna give it a little bit more of that realism. And while it seems subtle, it really matters when it comes to the eye. Home stretch, I'm on the last pieces, and that is her sigh. Well, you know, usually I would use like a gray board or something, like with Deadpool and his swords. However, you know, sometimes it can be hard to find just the right shade of gray for your project. And in this case, you see there's a lot of light bouncing off those sides. How do I get that sort of reflection? I'm gonna take a detour, and I'm gonna use aluminum. Now, I could use a thick bar like this, but I think instead I'm gonna use a thin bar stock that I can glue onto a piece of Wingay with some CA glue. CA glue works great for this. Just scuff up the back of the aluminum, scuff up the Wingay so it has something to stick to, glue it together, clamp it, let it dry, we're good to go. Good thing about this is I can use a really tiny blade with a fine tooth. It's gonna cut much quicker than it would if I'm using like a thick bar stock. Also, I can get ultra fine details with that tiny blade. Admittedly, I did go back and forth on if I wanted to do it this way or just use that big solid block of aluminum. And you know, ultimately that factor that tilted me over into the method I'm using is, well, the tilt of the sigh. If you look at it, they're pointing in a certain direction. And I know that having a wood bottom to this, like that Wingay, I can easily sand this at an angle. So whenever I put it into the artwork, I can position it so it is exactly tilted the way that I want it.
This ain't easy, darling, 'cause the devil's on my trail.
It looks like her sigh handles are have like some sort of black wrapping around it. So digging through my bag of ebony and really dark boards. So what I can do is use ebony to make those handles. But you know, one thing I need to remember is the highlights, because if I just take a really dark piece of ebony and I put it on that black background, it's gonna just disappear and it might look a little bit weird. And I need those highlights in there. So what I'm gonna do is I could take some blue mayho offcut. I could cut out the highlight. I could cut out the handle out of the ebony, stick those two together, and then that's gonna make up the actual handle for the sigh. Hopefully that blue mayho will give it just enough of the highlight that I need so that it's visible.
You better pray and run slow.
After a lot of cleanup work and sanding, it's finally time to apply finish. For finish, I'm gonna go with a spray lacquer. I did go back and forth between this and poly to figure out which one I wanted to do, and I did some test boards too. And polyurethane would look great on the red. I think it'd help preserve some of the color. However, it can yellow lighter colors like the maple and the holly. I don't want that. I want to keep those as light as possible, so there's a contrast between that and the red. So lacquer it is. Wow, this was an intense project, and it took me forever. I've never pushed my limits to this degree in terms of detail. There are countless tiny little cuts that probably aren't noticeable, but when you focus in closely on each of those little pieces, then you start to see them, and they add up in a big way, and it gives your artwork a considerable weight and depth to it. I do think that the Blue Mayho did its job. I think it provides just enough of those highlights so the hair looks like it has some volume to it. It doesn't just seem like a black blob in the background. I like the way the dress flows to it, but really, man, those size, I'm kind of digging how I use the aluminum for those size. I might have to remember that technique in the future. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Thank you to everyone over on Patreon for supporting me, supporting this channel, and being patient with this project, because it took me a long time, I will admit that one. All right, until we meet again, get in your shop and build something awesome.